Hello. So, Nokia, Toys R Us, and Kodak. What is the one thing that is common between these three brands? They all became irrelevant to our day-to-day life. In the 70s to the 80s, Kodak was so relevant to everyone. In the 90s, Toys R Us was even more relevant to everyone. In 2000s, Nokia became relevant and then irrelevant. So it's a game of relevancy that we are living with. You can only be relevant if you be in an inclusive economy. The minute you exclude anyone of the economy, you're irrelevant and will be out of business. Just like what happened with Toys R Us. They exclude the online technology, and they became out of business with more than $10 billion of debt. The company that I always look at, the only company that became irrelevant and then made a magic that became relevant is Disney. Disney was about to close down in the 70s because of Walt Disney management. Then his nephew, Roy Disney, came in place. He changed the whole game. He made Disney relevant to everyone. We all remember The Lion King. Lion King is the #1 relevancy business model. It's still living till today. You go to New York and watch The Lion King in theater and see how many billions of dollars Roy Disney sold of the merchandise of Lion King. That's what I call the relevancy in a more inclusive economies. My name is Mohammed Johmani, and I would love to be your moderator for the day. And I would like to welcome everyone. And we want to focus on the relevancy in businesses. And yesterday, I had a quick chat with everyone. And I would like to start with Sufyan. I was talking to Sufyan yesterday. And I told him how Macron, the new president of France, wanted to shift France and Europe to become the new Silicon Valley. And he said, I don't believe so. Silicon Valley is different. So I want to pick up from that discussion. Why do you think Silicon Valley has a different culture and cannot be replicated?
So, yeah, absolutely. We had this discussion. It's very interesting. In fact, I would say that what we want to do is be as innovative. And I think in France, we already have this strong innovation, and it has very strongly increased these last years with all the work that has been done around the French tech policy, as innovative as the Silicon Valley. But France has its own history, its own industrial policy, its own mindset, which is very specific to us, which makes France a creative country, but we cannot look at other examples. We say Silicon Valley, but throughout the world there are many other things.
But do you believe it's the role of the government to create another Silicon Valley, or the role of people like Google and Apple to create the Silicon Valley?
It's the role of government to put into place the right framework for the companies to be able to innovate and create wealth. But it's not the government who is going to create, in France I speak, a Silicon Valley. He's going to put into place the right framework and support the good initiatives in order to have the people and the entrepreneurs be confident in the future and have the right financial support also to invest in innovation.
I think Mr. Mohammed have an intake here, and he believed that it is the new generation that will make that change.
Well, thank you, Mohammed, for hosting us here today. I just want to talk about the framework, and before doing that, actually, I just want to mention that innovation is not Silicon Valley, right? Innovation, we can see it in different industries, in different sectors, and across different countries. I don't want to equate innovation with AI, blockchain, and all the great stuff that's happening at Silicon Valley. Having that said, I think the government has a key role in setting up the right framework for innovation, which includes a few pillars. One of which, as you mentioned, is developing human resources. At the end of the day, innovation comes from people, right? It's our thoughts, it's our determination to see things through, it's our brilliance that creates the right, it's our mindset as well.
But can you talk to us about the camp that you take these young kids
Absolutely.
and you immerse them in this.
So Sanduq al-Watan, I'm obviously the Director General of Sanduq al-Watan. We have a lot of initiatives on developing human capital, and we start from such a young age, because if you want people to reach their full potential, you need to make sure that they start reaching that potential at a very, very early stage. So 2 programs we do. One is to teach computer coding to all children here in the Emirates, and that's extremely important for innovation, as computer coding is the language of the current state and in the future, I would argue. And the other more important part is what you're alluding to, which is identifying gifted individuals here in the UAE from grades 5 all the way to grades 8. Being able to determine that these have the highest potential with regards to IQ, creative thinking, etc., and developing the right programs to enrich their skill sets, enrich their mindsets, so that when they grow up, they are ready to get into that framework that the government has set up and be able to develop their skills.
Fadi has something to add here. You said earlier that they start at an early stage, but you start at a later stage. I would like also for you to give a very brief about the relationship between Pivotal and Dell, quickly, because I just learned that it's owned by Dell Technologies.
So Pivotal, as a company, I'll start with this one. Pivotal is a company whose mission is to transform how the world builds software. And we do this by working with organizations to build the skill set, to build the culture of innovation, and to also provide the technology that will allow agility in terms of innovation. As Pivotal is part of Dell Technologies, so Pivotal was a spin-off from VMware and EMC, and now we're part of the Dell Technologies group. So in terms of, there was a comment earlier about Silicon Valley. So as Pivotal, we believe Silicon Valley is a state of mind, so it's not a location. And in fact, if you look at the world right now, you feel it's no longer Silicon Valley that is, monopolizing the whole process of innovation. You find different areas where innovation is happening around the world. And part of the state of mind is building or changing the culture of how innovation should happen. So we look at very simple principles. So we're moving into a stage where, given that the process of innovation is a very iterative process, so we need to match as well how we build products. And from our angle, software is the main driver of innovation.
Can you focus on the subject of readiness of government to adapt software and technology?
Yeah. So the government plays a very important role. So, and I think when we look at readiness, we try to tackle it from 3 angles. One angle is culture, the second angle is skill set and resources, and third angle is technology. Culture is the most difficult part, so I'll leave it until the end. So technology these days, I think, is the simplest part. So there are lots of technologies available that will help and enable agility. To give you an example, the UK Government Digital Services, a few years back, they decided to implement a platform that will enable different government entities, and that platform is based on Cloud Foundry, to enable different entities to innovate and share services at speed. In terms of skill set, I mean, this is an area which Mr. Mohammed is trying to work on from an early stage. And I think what Pivotal is trying to do is to try to work on that aspect at the later stages. Skill set can always be acquired, and we want to make sure that we immerse teams within organizations in this aspect of creativity and innovation, so that they can add this to their arsenal of
I want to build on that word immerse and ask Stefan. When we spoke earlier, you really focused on how data-driven organization is the only organization can take a leap of technology, moving to the future.
Sure. Thanks for that question. And it's not only about organizations like industry, it's also about government. So it's true for both. And if we recognize that the number of data generated every day increases due to the fact that the sensors are cheaper, more precise. And there are so many prosumers, so that means entities, people, organizations, machines that produce and consume data. So the number of data available increases significantly. So what to do with it? So we are already able to build systems for biology, for citizens, for communities, for industry and subsystems that we can define in a system in a certain discrete way, and we are able to make predictions about the future system behavior, and that is why this is so important, to be able to know what happens in the future, at least to predict it.
But we all know that governments have so much data. They have data about everyone, almost every one of us. But who is responsible first of protecting this data and the use of these data to the benefit of people? Is it the government or private sector? And how would the government give the private sector this access without giving them more than the access needed to make our life better?
Excellent question. So, first of all, we need some regulations regarding data security. I think that is clear. However, they will look like, hopefully open enough to be not an inhibitor for innovation. On the other hand, what do we see actually in the world is that people own their data. It's not anybody else. And it's especially true for health data, what we heard before, that people own their data and they allow to share or to use this data for institutions. So I think it's a twofold approach. We need the regulations on the one hand. On the other hand, we need a completely new setup of me owning my data and sharing this data with whoever needs it. And
so I want to ask the audience, how many of you have read the privacy policy of, let's say, Facebook before they sign up? One. So one only read the privacy policy. So do you think that's a good thing or no? Do people know how much Facebook knows about them?
Since the latest developments, I think a lot of people have a certain idea about this, but that's a very good example, as Facebook is not the model treating me as a customer, but I'm the good. So I have no right to decide on what happens with my data, more or less, if I exaggerate. So we have to turn this around. We have to make a 100-degree turn. I own the data, I share it, and it's not an anonymous body like Facebook or anybody else who decides about my data and what happens with it.
Eduardo, the reason I left you last because you're from Madrid and I'm a Barcelona fan. So
oh, nice.
You should know why. Anyway, so Eduardo, to carry on that, your startup is built on algorithm.
Yes.
So your meat and butter and everything is algorithm. And you can only utilize algorithm if you have enough data.
Of course.
And you are dealing with health. Yeah. And the health industry it carry a lot of potential if we know how to utilize this data. But it seems when I looked at your startup, you have nailed that. You have utilized this data. Can you give us a brief background of how this idea started and where are you with this startup?
Sure. So, well, I'm a medical doctor, and a couple of years ago I was in a consult in the hospital, and a little girl with diabetes just placed the insulin pump on top of the table, and she rejected the treatment. And I was very shocked because I wasn't expecting that in the 21st century in a well-known disease as diabetes. So we created a non-invasive artificial pancreas based on one side on a predictive glucose algorithm that can answer questions like what happens if I drink a Coke in 30 minutes for the patients through a chatbot interface. And then we have a patch that delivers drugs through the skin with no needles. So that connects and builds the non-invasive artificial pancreas. And as Stefan was saying, I agree that there is a big problem regarding data, and especially because people should own their data, but then there's if regulations are too tough, then that's an inhibitor for innovation. So in our development, what we found out was that there's not much publicly available data around diabetes or mainly anything related to healthcare.
So how do you communicate to your users that you are collecting very, very private data of their health and use it to their algorithm? And do you use this data for other users?
No. So basically our data, we use it to train the algorithm at the moment. We do see a revenue model in the future based on aggregated data, but nothing to have to do with any kind of personal data. So we will not be able to segment users and recommend specific products. We will just aggregate the data and then build populational models around diabetes.